Hello and welcome to another episode of Anfield Watch. Today our main topic is going to be Giorgi Mamardashvili, who's joining Liverpool next season. And to do this, I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Mikha Gabechava, who was a scout for Mamardashvili's agency and also a scout for Mamardashvili's first club, Dinamo Tbilisi. So he is probably one of the best person to talk about him. And we're going to get into it. But first of all, Mikha, welcome to the show.
Hello, Ben. Thanks a lot once again for having me. And yeah, it's going to be a great one. I always enjoy discussing some things about Georgian players, and especially when it comes to Mamardashvili, because he's my favorite player from my country.
That's great to hear, especially as a Liverpool fan. But first of all, what was your reaction when he first signed for Liverpool? Were you happy, or did the move surprise you?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I was very happy, but it was not unexpected. I was expecting him to move to a top club somewhere in the near future, and I was totally expecting him to be in the Premier League. Although, I was probably not expecting Liverpool. I was probably imagining a top club like Man City, Man United, Liverpool, signing him one day, but probably not as soon. But I was, happily delighted to see him basically to sign for Liverpool, because it's a huge club and I think he will perform really, really well in the Premier League.
To begin with, what kind of player he is? Obviously, you knew him for a long time, going back to his academy days as a goalkeeper, trying to break through at Dinamo Tbilisi. What's your impression of him? What kind of player is he?
Well, goalkeepers are a different breed, as everyone says. So he's a bit different from all the other players, especially in the national team. Because in the national team we mostly have young players, and all of them are always making jokes, having fun. He's also a very funny guy, but he's very shy and humble. But the thing that always stood out for me about him, and I always mentioned that already several times, was his mentality. Because even back in the days when he was at Dinamo Tbilisi, he was not given a proper chance to prove himself in the first team, even though he was in the first team sometimes. But he never played actually for Dinamo, which was frustrating because I believe he should have been given a chance. And funnily enough, when Dinamo missed a chance to play such a top talent in the first team, and because they also missed out on Kvaratskhelia, they now started to play all the youngsters in the first team. If you look at their first team squad, it's mostly like under 22, under 23 players. And their average age of the first team is probably around 21 or 22. So they started integrating all the youngsters in the first team because of that. Just to go back to Mamardashvili's topic, even though he was never given a proper chance in the first team, he was always working really hard, and he believed in himself, and he always knew that once he got the chance, he would prove everyone that he was the best in the world.
Yeah, and obviously he's had quite a crazy trajectory since leaving Dinamo Tbilisi. He ended up signing for Valencia for their second team initially, and then within a few weeks, because of the amount of injuries and it was around COVID, he actually managed to get the call up to the first team, and then kind of went in, played a couple of games, and hasn't looked back since. He's been a regular there, the number one goalkeeper since. How crazy was that for Georgian people watching back home, seeing a young goalkeeper playing at this level so early and so quickly?
Well, yeah, that was probably more unexpected than the signing for Liverpool, to be honest, because when he joined, as you mentioned, he joined as a B team player. And during the summertime when they had the preseason, their first goalkeeper, who was back then Silesen, and back then he was a big name, he got injured Then the second goalkeeper also got injured. Then the third goalkeeper had some issues with the first team because he wanted to be the first goalkeeper, as always. And basically because of that, Mamardashvili was given a chance during the preseason. He played against AC Milan. I think it was AC Milan in the first game. And then basically because of a few very good performances during the preseason, it was very unexpected then that he was the first choice goalkeeper in the opening game of La Liga in that season. So his first ever season and the first ever game, and he is already a starter, even though I think Silesen was fit enough to play. But he was still given the spot in the first team, and he played. And in the very first game, he basically won the 3 points because he made a crucial save in the last minute. They could have basically either lost or drew the game, but he actually won that game. So after that, he continued his performances, 3-4 games, and then basically he had a very poor performance 5 games after. It was Sevilla away, and partially that poor performance was because he was not used to traveling that much. And in Spain, you travel a lot and you travel by plane. So he was constantly jet lagged. And yeah, he made a couple of bad mistakes. They lost the game. And after that, he was benched. And he was benched for around 4 months. But basically why I mention his mentality all the time was exactly that. Basically, during those 4 months, he demonstrated his elite level mentality. He never gave up. The moment he was sat on the bench, he knew that he would come back, and he knew that he would come back stronger than ever. And he was just waiting for his chance. And he knew that chance would come because the coach back then actually loved him. So he knew that he was gonna, perform one day. And when he actually got the chance, then he was the starting goalkeeper since that day. And yeah, I mean, especially when it comes to goalkeepers, sometimes the mentality is what differentiates between a very good goalkeeper and an elite level goalkeeper, because a lot of goalkeepers make brilliant saves. A lot of goalkeepers have wonderful seasons, but not all goalkeepers have that elite level mentality that when you have a poor performance, when the team is not performing well, they might not recover from that really well. But this guy, he just doesn't care. As I said previously, he has that switch button in his mind where he can basically switch off and forget everything that happened during the game, forget that he made a mistake. But I'm not saying that he will forget that he made the mistake and then carry on making those mistakes. He will analyze what he did, and he will basically continue performing at a very high level, which is exactly the elite level mentality that not every player has, and probably top 1% of players have it, and that's why Liverpool went for him.
Obviously, during those times as well, you know this because you went to visit him and kind of saw this firsthand, the kind of character that he had. Like, that's why I was sort of curious to find out, what is he like away from the pitch? Is he still obsessed with football, or does he have any other sort of downtimes or pastimes that he likes to do?
Well, yeah, I mean, he's a very, very calm guy. You will probably rarely see him partying all night long or anything. Well, not rarely, but never. When he was younger, when he was in Tbilisi, he didn't even know the main clubs and bars and places that everyone, especially young people, know here. And because he was basically all the time either training or at home. So yeah, he's obsessed with football. But outside of the pitch, he's a very, very calm guy. Most of the time, he plays with his friends, either FIFA or something like that, video games with his friends. But yeah, he's a very, very calm guy, very shy, doesn't speak too much. And yeah, but he's a great, great person. I absolutely love him.
You knew him before he started to break out and then after he broke out. How did that change him, or did it change him at all in terms of, being, I think, a second choice goalkeeper at Dinamo Tbilisi to being first choice at Valencia? Did he change the character at all, or did he just remain the same?
To be honest, he's exactly the same. Like nowadays, even if you speak with him today, he's exactly the same. He doesn't care because probably that's also a part of his elite level mentality because probably when he was younger, he was expecting himself to be that number one guy in the world, number one goalkeeper in the world. So when you are expecting yourself to be the best in the world, then you probably, well, it was probably not unexpected for him to make that move to Valencia, to make that move to Liverpool, because in the back of his mind, he was always that guy. So yeah, I mean, that's probably why he never changed, because he believed himself. If he was a guy who was just very lucky to be at Valencia, then he would have changed. But yeah, that's why he's elite.
You mentioned how he doesn't really think about his mistakes, or he kind of forgets his mistakes. Do you think that's the key for a goalkeeper, to sort of be able to deal with a setback like that? Because naturally, I think as a goalkeeper, it's such a harsh position in football, so to say, that you are inevitably going to make mistakes. It happens even to the best goalkeepers, but it's how you deal with those and how you forget them and how you sort of handle that situation when the pressure is on you and when the eyes are focused on you. Do you think the fact that he can deal with those so well is probably one of his best assets, or best traits?
Well, absolutely, because especially once again, well, the goalkeeper is the most important player on the pitch and the most difficult position to play. You need much more talent to be a goalkeeper than to be a winger. No disrespect to wingers, but to be a goalkeeper is much more difficult because you're alone. You are just on your own, and it takes much more courage and character to be a goalkeeper. And as you said, exactly, everyone makes mistakes. Even the legends of the game, Neuer, Buffon, Casillas, everyone has had this moments of poor performances, some mistakes during the game. So yeah, it's exactly how you deal with them because especially when you're young, when you're a goalkeeper, when you make a mistake, if that mistake, especially during the game, affects you and if it breaks you, you will make probably 10 more mistakes during that specific game and you'll probably lose 10-0. So it's exactly the speed at which you can analyze and forget that mistake. That's exactly what differentiates between, once again, the elite and the very good ones.
I wanted to touch on this season as well because he's received a little bit of criticism. Valencia haven't been in great form in La Liga. I think as we are currently speaking, they are in the relegation zone and they are fighting for relegation. But as a Georgian, obviously you follow his games. How have you perceived his performances? Has there been a dip?
Well, yeah, to be honest, we cannot neglect the fact that he had slightly poor performances compared to last seasons, like previous seasons. But I was actually expecting that. And that was exactly why I was insisting that he should have joined Bournemouth on loan at the start of the season. And well, I mentioned that. I'm not saying that I'm criticizing him too much about it because that's his decision. That's how he felt. But logically, if you think about it, he should have joined Bournemouth because, well, if you look at it, if you're making mistakes, if you're having poor performances, it's better to have poor performances at Bournemouth rather than at Valencia because, well, making mistakes or having poor performances at Valencia doesn't change anything anymore because you've already done that. You've already been there and you know everything over there. So yeah, that's what you were doing just for the past 3 years. While if you do that at Bournemouth, you will at least adapt to the league, you will adapt to the culture, you will adapt to the environment of playing in a different league. So yeah, that's exactly why I should have joined Bournemouth. But just to go back about his performances at Valencia, even though his performances were not as world class as, for example, in previous years. Also, we should mention that his team is not performing as well as they were in previous seasons, even though they were already performing quite poorly in previous seasons. This season is probably the worst that they've played over the last 3-4 years. And it's very important to mention that the goalkeeper and the back line are very interrelated, because when there is a central defender, when the central defender has a very good goalkeeper playing behind him, he plays absolutely differently, because the central defender is not trying to do the job of the goalkeeper. So he's covering different spaces when he has a good goalkeeper behind his back. And he's doing absolutely different things when he has a poor goalkeeper standing behind him, because now the center back is trying to cover the spaces where he thinks that the goalkeeper can't reach. And that's exactly the same for the goalkeeper. When the goalkeeper is confident that his center backs and his full backs will cover spaces for him, then he can concentrate on covering spaces that he can cover. But once again, when the center back is not performing well, he's now trying to guess what to do. And when you're trying to guess, especially when you're playing against Barcelona, you have probably 0.1 second to guess, which is not enough. So that is why it's very difficult for him this season. But once again, that shows me why he is amazing, because he doesn't have a strong backline at the club level. He doesn't have a strong backline at the national team level. And at the national team level, he is, he's number one. Even though everyone speaks about Kvaratskhelia is amazing. He's absolutely world class. But everyone speaks about Kvaratskhelia because he's scoring goals and he's popular. Mamardashvili is also popular, but slightly less because he's not scoring goals. But no one is speaking enough how important he was during our Euros and during basically the group stages when we qualified for the Euros, because he was the number one player. He was the backbone of the national team, and basically it was him who dragged us to the Euros. Even though Kvaratskhelia is scoring in every single game, if we don't have Mamardashvili in goal, we're just conceding twice as many as Kvaratskhelia is scoring. So it doesn't make sense for him to score goals. And yeah, I mean, if we have time, I will just tell you a quick story on the topic of the national team, because one of the things that he was poor at in previous years was penalty saving. And basically his first ever penalty shootout was in 2022. It was the Copa del Rey final against Betis, and it went to the penalties and he didn't save any. Probably he should have saved at least one. And basically they lost the final. Then the next penalty shootout that he had was in the summer 2023, when we were in the quarterfinals of under 21 Euros, and we lost that game against Israel on penalties once again. And I was at the stadium and I remember that he should have saved at least 2 of those penalties, because he could have saved. And after the game, he said, and he promised that, basically he would win himself. He would win the next penalty shootout, whatever and wherever it might have been. And when the next season started, he saved 3 penalties in La Liga for Valencia. And at the end of the season, he had the game in the national team. It was the Euro qualifications final against Greece, and it went to penalties. So there was his promise. That was the next penalty shootout after that under 21 Euro. And it was probably, and once again, this proves how elite he is, because it takes only elite level mentality to perform in that game. Because just to give you a context, that game against Greece, that final, was the most important game in the history of Georgian football. It doesn't get any more important than that. And probably no player in Georgian history has ever experienced that much pressure, and probably will never experience that much pressure, because it was the first, well, it was the second attempt, but it was the final, and it was basically full Dinamo Arena, even though it seats 55,000 people. There were probably more than that, because there were some people just standing on the stairs, you know. And it went to penalties. He saved the penalty, and even during the game, well, he was the best, and that's why we went to the Euros, because he saved the penalty. We won the penalty shootout, and he was the best player on the pitch during 120 minutes. And as you can imagine, as I mentioned, because the goalkeeper is the most important figure on the pitch, the most difficult position to play in, he was the best. And just to put that alongside the fact that it was the most important game in the history of the country, that's exactly why he is elite. He stepped up in the moment where it mattered the most to the whole country, not only for him and for his club, for the whole country. So that is exactly why he's absolutely world class.
Do you know how he worked to develop his penalty saving skills? Was he just facing a lot of penalties in training, trying to get better and better, or was there any other techniques that he used to improve?
As I know, he was always practicing his penalties after the training. So especially in the national team, he would basically, after the training, he would leave Kvaratskhelia, Davitashvili, and a couple of other guys, and he would urge them to take penalties against him. And basically, he wouldn't leave the pitch unless he saved the penalty. And as soon as he saved the penalty, he would leave the pitch. So that's how he was training, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think going back to his form as well, what I would add is you compare the Georgia national team defence and the Valencia defence, but I would say, looking at Georgia at the Euros, I think the reason why he was so good in that competition is because how well drilled Georgia's defence was, that how well organised they were. And I think that's something we cannot say about this Valencia team right now. It's absolute chaos, the way they are playing at this moment. So that lack of organisation and that point you made, I think it's a very relevant point, and I think it's important to sort of put into context his performances, because when you're playing in a chaotic team like Valencia, as a goalkeeper or any player, even as an outfield player, it's really difficult to stand out.
Yeah, definitely. When I'm watching the game, I'm expecting Valencia's opponents to take a shot from anywhere on the pitch. So if I'm expecting it, he's definitely expecting to face a shot anytime during the game, because I've seen opponents take shots from, well, all sorts of angles and distances, simply because Valencia's midfielders and defenders are not closing down opponents quickly enough, and they are just allowing too much space. And when opponents have just too much space ahead of them, they just take shots, and sometimes they get lucky. And yeah, I mean, exactly what I was saying. When he's expecting to face a shot any moment during the game, he's already starting to concentrate on different things, and there's sometimes not enough time to concentrate on so many things at the same time.
I think as well that his numbers are naturally going to drop in terms of like save percentages and stuff when he's facing more shots as well, because he's facing a lot more volume. So I think people look at those numbers and they say, oh wow, they've really gone down or they've really dropped. The reality is, it's not that he's a worse goalkeeper than last season. It's just he's facing a lot more shots, playing in a chaotic team, and all of that added together is going to make his numbers look worse and is going to make his performances look worse too.
Exactly. It's good that you mentioned stats, because when we look at numbers, the numbers that we look at, just normal people, are just basic stats. And this basic stats can be interpreted in many different ways. It can portray player as the number one in the world, or much worse than he was last year. But well, as I know, and as I've read from the book How to Win the Premier League, Liverpool probably has the best data analysis department in the game. So they're definitely not looking at just save percentages and passing accuracy. They're looking at some stuff that we don't know. And well, as we've seen during the previous years, well, most of your transfers have been absolutely amazing. And that's thanks to the data analytics department that was put into place. And I'm pretty sure that they're looking at some things that are much more than just saving percentages and long range passing accuracy. They've definitely spotted something that probably I don't know as well, because that's, well, that's probably a top secret that they have developed there in the data analytics department. And that's why they are number one.
Absolutely. And going back to what you mentioned about the Bournemouth situation, was that his decision, in your understanding, to stay at Valencia, or did something come up, or did the circumstances change, or was it just Mamardashvili deciding, I want to stay at Valencia and be loyal to the team that gave me all these opportunities?
Well, as I know, it was his decision. Although, to be honest, I haven't discussed it with him in detail, to be honest. But as I know, it was his decision. And basically, his reasoning was that he wanted to give everything back to the team that gave him everything. Probably they gave, well, I'm sad to say this, but probably Valencia gave Mamardashvili much more than Dinamo Tbilisi did, because at least they gave him enough playing time to prove himself. So he wanted to give something back. He didn't want to leave the team in such a poor condition. And he knew that basically, well, he was ready that the team would be much worse than it was last season. And that's exactly, as I mentioned, that was exactly why he didn't want to leave the team alone. So yeah, that was his reasoning. But well, if you ask me, I already told you what my logic is.
Well, I think that loyalty will appeal to Liverpool fans because you want players who feel that kind of connection to a club. So I think that is a plus point for him as well. And there's another thing that sort of is talked about with him. Last season, he received a little bit of criticism for his ball playing ability, and this is something that's very important in an Arne Slot slide. But I think just watching his games at the Euros and seeing how important his distribution was for Georgia to get those counter-attacks going, I think that was kind of unfair criticism on him, really. And again, it goes back down to how Valencia play as a team, for me, rather than necessarily his own ability on the ball.
Well, 100%. I totally agree with you. And once again, I think if people just look at his passing numbers and say that, well, he's not at the level as Alisson is, you have to also consider, well, who does Alisson have, well, ahead of him? Who is the guy who's receiving the ball? And, well, where are the spaces where he can make those passes? So when you look at that, you will quickly realize that Mamardashvili is playing in a totally different context, and probably some things that, well, some of the passes that he's making are just his own creativity and his imagination. And yeah, as you mentioned, for example, if you look at his games and his footwork for the national team and how he distributes passes in the national team and how he plays in Valencia, those are two different players. And I think when he joins a better team, his passing game will, well, in terms of numbers at least, it will improve significantly.
And this is something that at Dinamo Tbilisi, because you had guys there from La Masia working in the academy. So the passing game is something he will have learned in the academy at a young age in terms of the tiki-taka football and that kind of thing, because that's how Dinamo's academies play. So this shouldn't necessarily be an issue for him, should it?
100%. But also, well, I probably mentioned this already, but even more than just Dinamo Tbilisi's youth setup, what was more important was his coach at Lokomotiv Tbilisi, because that was it was his second loan from Dinamo, and that was when he actually started performing at a high level. And his coach back then, Giorgi Mamardashvili, in Georgia, he's famous for playing that style of football, building out from the back, distributing passes through goalkeepers. And he was the first guy who actually forced Mamardashvili to play out from the back. Because before then, as you mentioned, he was at Dinamo, but he was not actually playing there, so nobody could have forced him to distribute passes from the bench. So that coach was the first guy who forced him to play out from the back. That was his style of play. And even though Mamardashvili was not the best guy to do that, he actually improved him in that aspect. So when he joined Valencia, obviously Spain, the guys who were famous for doing that, he started improving, at a higher rate, because his goalkeeper coach, he's Ocho Torrena, he's a legendary goalkeeper coach who's worked with all the legends of Spain, such as Casillas and everyone, Canizares, and all those legendary goalkeepers. So that's why he's been improving.
Now we're going to get into some fun stuff, or maybe kind of lighter-hearted conversations. And I wanted to ask you, in terms of goalkeepers of the current era or of the past era, who does he compare to? Who would you compare him to?
Yeah, that's a good question. I always said that he was very similar to Jan Oblak, because, traditionally he was very good on the line. He was always amazing, and he's still amazing. But I see him developing into a new type of goalkeeper. Basically, an updated version of Jan Oblak. I'm not sure who I can compare him to, but he's a sort of he can be an improved version of Jan Oblak. That's I'm sure about that.
In terms of Liverpool, obviously his big challenge is going to be to challenge Alisson for that number one spot. How does he compare to Alisson? What are the differences? What are the similarities between the two of them?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest difference, I think, is that even though Mamardashvili is improving his on-the-ball ability, and he has already significantly improved in that. When I look at Alisson, he's sometimes playing as a defensive midfielder, and he's incredible on the ball. Right now, I wouldn't say that Mamardashvili is exactly at the same level, but at least I would say that he can get to that level. And that is not alarming to me, because that is exactly why he's not at Liverpool right now today. That's why he's on loan. But I don't know Alisson personally, but when I look at him, I think that probably their mentality is very similar, because he seems like a chill, humble, shy guy. And that's exactly how Mamardashvili is off the pitch. Although on the pitch he's very, very vocal and a true leader on the pitch. But yeah, I mean, in terms of their on-the-line abilities, I think they're very similar to that, because both of their reaction times, their reflexes, their wingspan, they're huge also. So that's what they have in common.
Do you think he's ready to be the number one choice at Liverpool next season, or do you think he might need a step and another loan, maybe somewhere else, before he can start challenging Alisson?
That's a good question. I think people have asked him that question as well, to which he basically responded that he was ready to step up and play immediately. And I think if he says so, then that's right. So I would then agree and say that he would be ready to be Liverpool's number one goalkeeper if Liverpool decide to play him as number one. But once again, if Liverpool decide to keep Alisson, I think it's no question that he must join a Premier League club on loan, and no other club, no, not like in Bundesliga or Serie A or somewhere else in La Liga. I think it must be a Premier League club just for him to adapt to the environment, and probably after that one loan, he will be the number one goalkeeper for Liverpool.
In terms of my final question, this might be the hardest one for you, or the easiest, who knows? But what do you think is his potential? How far can he go in the game?
Well, logically, I'm thinking that he can be the best in the world, because when you play for Liverpool and when you play for the best team in the world, you are performing much better than you were performing at Valencia. So your performance is also significantly improved. So that is why I think he can be the best in the world. Because, for example, if he wins the Premier League or the Champions League with Liverpool, he's already the best. So that's why I think he can be, well, I think he can maintain in the top three in the world for a very long time. But at some point, or at different points in his career, he can be named as the number one goalkeeper of the year.
I mean, he was already nominated for it last year.
Yeah.
I don't think he'll get a nomination this time around, but you know, if he does get to become Liverpool's first choice goalkeeper, then he's got every chance to make it, like you said.
Absolutely. And to be honest, what's more important is that he believes in that. So it doesn't matter if I say so, if you think so. If he believes in that, he's gonna do it. So I think that is exactly what gives me the confidence to say that.
Well, Mika, thank you for your time. Really appreciated it. This has been really insightful, and I think I'm excited for Mamardashvili to come to Liverpool whenever that will be. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it as well.
And thanks everyone for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to give it a like and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you're listening to this on our podcast platforms, make sure you subscribe to our podcast platforms as well.